The opportunity to drive an entirely new Taco is a big deal. So clearly, if we're trying to understand the new Taco, we can't do the usual dance in the usual place. Which is why I have approved an increase in the production budget of this episode to include a car wash. Yes, you and I have a habit of talking about things high-tech, and it's very exciting. However, what's more exciting is car porn, or specifically for today, truck porn. What you are looking at is kind of a Frankenstein chassis of the old Tacoma and the old V6. However, more importantly, you and I need to focus here. This is the new Tacoma, the 2024. Now, to kick off today's experience properly, we have to focus on the engine. No, not to rehash the output figures, but those while we're here, 278 horsepower and 317 torque from a turbo. But you look at this and you're thinking to yourself, that's a TRD Pro. We're not driving a TRD Pro today. Rather, this is kind of a Frankenstein of frames. The frame is a 2024 Tacoma. The front is a 2024 TRD Pro. The engine, though, is the 2.4 turbo without the hybrid. But that's where we get this interesting array of parts. So we got the transmission here, which is the 8-speed automatic. Now, clearly there is something missing here. That would be the transfer case. Yet this placement gives us a really good understanding of the architecture of the transmission with the engine. Remember, we talked about the TRD Pro and the Trail Hunter, which is stunning here in that color over there. That has a mild hybrid system. There's an integrated starter generator motor that sits between the engine and transmission, and that would be sitting literally here. So this, the 2.4 turbo, has the same bell housing as the TRD Pro or the Trail Hunter. Now that brings us to an important aspect about the new Taco, which would be fuel economy. And here we can go into two different directions. There's that hybrid max powertrain, the one with the integrated starter generator motor. That one we can't talk about today because A, we're not driving it right now. That's going to be April, and we don't have fuel economy figures. However, we do have fuel economy figures for the 2.4 turbo. And they're in the most basic one, which is the SR, which is an extra cab and has the leaf springs. It's also the lightest. That's decent. It's 20, 26, 23 combined. However, the one we're driving today, the TRD Off-Road, which is a bit heavier, that one's 18, 23, 20 combined. Okay, now that we got the government out of the way, a favor. If you get value out of these episodes, subscribe, like, leave a comment. I hate having to ask you this, but the YouTube algorithm, a complete bitch. Arigato. Not exactly lightweight. It's about 4,200 pounds on the low end, or around 1,900 kilograms, or on the high end with the mild hybrid system and all the bits the fancy ones have, they go up to about 4,700 pounds or 2,150 kilograms. Now the car you and I are driving, we got lucky. They had like 2 manuals on this drive, and I stole one of them. And that's really going to understand what's important here, and that is the torque. The torque on this, remember, is 317, but not really for the car you and I are driving. This is the manual. We actually lose a bit of torque in the manual. We go down to 310. Is it a huge difference? No, but there is a difference that you notice, I would argue, only here, probably in extreme road situations. Here, I've got plenty of torque in first gear, which is great, right? But you lose a bit of usability. Let's try this again here. I'm gonna go to second, again 4 high, and there's a huge gap. The gearing, it's very wide between 1 and 2 on the manual. Am I complaining about it? Not really. Then another interesting tidbit here. Let's come to a stop on this hill here. Take a look at the Rocky Oaks Vineyard here. And notice, you think I'm gonna roll back here. I take my foot off the brake. There is a hill holder clutch. And I got plenty of torque to pull me out of this situation. Now, the interesting aspect about this, yeah, we're focused on torque in this specific exercise. The one thing I don't notice the impact of a turbocharger. I feel like the delivery of the power, the horsepower, it's consistent, it's even.
So I wanted to show you guys a couple things about the new Tacoma. So this is not it. This is the old one. This is the previous generation Tacoma frame chassis. And why am I standing here? Well, I wanted to show you the frame. This is what they used to call the tri-frame design. So it's boxed in the front. It's got this sandwich. Do you see the sandwich here? So it's kind of got a double section here, and it's now open C channel. And then it goes to a single C channel in the back. They used to really like this because the frame would twist, right? Why do you want the frame to twist? Well, you can get more articulation off-road. But now they have a new philosophy, and the philosophy is to make the frame of this truck, which is the backbone, right, stronger, more capable, and then you can tune the suspension a little bit more precisely. So this is what they did, specifically this section here. So I was just talking to the chief engineer, Sheldon, and he said this is their proprietary process where they laser weld this high strength or ultra high strength steel into a sandwich to make a fully boxed frame, and do this in specific places, not everywhere, but in those places where strength is needed. So they actually increased the wheelbase by about 4 inches. They made this frame a little bit wider. They kept the overall dimensions of the truck about the same as far as overall length. They made it a little bit wider in the track, so made it for a more stable platform. They switched the position of the tank, so the tank is now on the passenger side, used to be on the driver's side. And they changed the rear suspension too. The rear suspension is now coil sprung. They do have a base Tacoma with leaf springs as well, but this is where it's at because you can get a little bit more precision with coil springs. You see down here. And this rear end is actually TRD off-road model, which means it has these Bilstein shocks and multi-link design and a giant rear axle. Look at the size of this puppy. This is basically almost the same size as the Tundra. And by the way, also, this part right here on the table, this right here, is the front disconnectable sway bar. So why do you need something like this? Well, actually, this section in the middle of it is what makes it so you can have the stabilizer bar for highway driving. So when this is all connected, you have the stiffness. So when you're on the highway, you don't lean. The truck doesn't lean very much, right, side to side. But off-road, you need the suspension to work up and down. So with a push of a button, you can disconnect this so the two parts can be kind of acting independently of each other. And Toyota says you gain, what did they say, about almost 100 millimeters. What is that, 4 inches of travel with this device. So they don't have a front locker, they have a rear locker in this truck. But without the front locker, you can still try to keep your tires on the ground using this feature and get out of trouble off-road.
Now, this is the point of our episodes where you and I usually talk about driving dynamics. Here, we have to have a bit of a different focus like we did in pulling power. Instead of torque, let's talk about structure, meaning strength of the vehicle. How does it feel going down this kind of a steep grade? Do I feel like it's coming apart at the seams? Do I feel like it's twisting between the box in the back, or the bed in the back, and the cab? And that's where I have to say you do notice a difference between this and previous generation of Tacomas. This feels, it's drastically different. You feel the extra strength. Now the real test of this is going to be mogul, so really what we're trying to accomplish here is articulation of the suspension. And yeah, we might have the full travel, the full extension. Actually, before we do this, this is a TRD off-road, so this is the most basic one when we can get the sway bar disconnect. And I believe it is doing that. Yes, it is. Okay, now we are disconnected in the front. Now this, I'm not so much surprised that it works. Yeah, of course it's gonna work. It's how does it feel? How does the structure feel as we are trying to articulate the suspension more? Granted, this is an unusual situation. You're only gonna do this in places like Moab, Utah, or when the manufacturer actually sets up a trail like this. But here, again, I notice the strength of the structure. It feels like it's carved out of one billet of aluminum rather than being a ladder frame. Okay, now you and I are coming to a more challenging point of this off-road course. We're going to get a little bit of a bank turn here. I think this is up to 30 degrees. And notice, I'm getting through here again. I expect this to work in a Toyota Tacoma. What I'm noticing here is everything, this is where everything kind of comes together. The structure, the way they set up the suspension here, it just feels more confident when you're throwing this thing off its normal plane of motion. Now here, you and I are coming to another articulation test, and this is where we have to get our discussion onto the coils in the back. You guys have seen a couple episodes with Sheldon, the chief engineer of this thing, and he had a really tough decision. Do you stick with leaf springs in the back? And in his case, he decided to do both. He's got the basic ones that have the leaf springs, and wow, whew, that was quite an angle. He's got the leaf springs in the back on the SR and the pre-runner, but in this, we got the coils. And there, it felt a bit more planted. I think this would be more of a TFL discussion. Like Roman and Andre would know more about how big of a difference that is. In terms of my personal experience, this one feels a bit more planted in the ass end. No, it is not that time to play your favorite game of mine, the options game, because we don't have any pricing. Actually, that is not entirely the truth. You see, I have two numbers. The base price of a current Toyota Tacoma, or I should say now last generation Toyota Tacoma, was $28,600. That's for the most basic one. My barber, who I've told you about before, he's got the fanciest one. Obviously, I'm paying too much for a haircut. He has the TRD Pro. It is a super cool color. He's got it fully kitted out, and I think he paid like 58 grand for that vehicle. I don't know if that was virus pricing. Now that, of course, brings us to the obvious question: how much is this one going to be? Well, once again, the most basic model is going to be $31,500. That's an extra cab SR two-wheel drive with the leaf springs. But the one you and I are driving today, this is kind of like the best of the middle of the road, at least in my view, because this is the TRD off-road, so it has the Bilstein dampers. It only comes as the double cab, but most importantly, I believe this is the highest one you can get the manual transmission. But I digress, so let's take a stab in the dark of the pricing of this one. If the most basic one is $31,500, so that is about 3 grand more than what it was before. Let's add 3 grand to the middle pack of the Tacomas. I'm guessing this one's probably going to be 45, 48. Perhaps we can probably play a game here. I'm not going to award prizes, but I will award bonus points for those closest to the real price of this vehicle, which I believe we'll find out in December or January. So yes, this episode is very much focused on off-road, but I did want to get it back on-road for at least a couple of notes about the ride quality. And here, surprise of surprise, you feel that stiffness like we did off-road. It still feels like a Tacoma. The experience is that of a Tacoma. It just feels a bit more together. It feels a bit more modern. I would be lying if I said it's just the suspension and the ladder frame. I think it's a combination of everything. Like, for example, the interior, it's no longer barbaric. It's no longer something that came from 1923. So it feels like a more modern experience when you put it all together. Now, a huge note about that experience. You can see the white trim on the dash here. This is a very early pre-production prototype. So what that means is we're not going to see that in a production unit. Instead, this is a TRD Sport, which is the most basic version of the TRD. This has the TRD dampers, and the one we're driving off-road, that's got the Bilstein dampers. But in the TRD Sport, that's important because that trim, that's white here, it's body color when it comes from the factory, which I have to say transforms the interior. It's a nice little touch that adds some design flair. May I ask for that in all levels of Tacoma, not just one or two versions. Now, aside from the obvious of driving a manual transmission, entirely new pickup truck off-road, this was an unusual learning experience. Now, why do I say that? Well, to answer that question, we have to go back to the last generation Tacoma. It clearly has been the best seller in the segment. Yes, because it's capable, but I would argue because of price and frankly because it's a Toyota, reliability. It's completely bulletproof. That's why family members of mine buy Tacomas and 4Runners. What this does is pick up from that point and build on it. The best way to express this, the whole thing just feels more cohesive. In other words, this isn't just about being a reliable Toyota that goes off-road. It feels modern on the inside. You don't feel like you're in some archaic place from the 18th century. You feel like you're in a modern day vehicle that, I don't want to say feels like luxury, but it's screwed together better than even the previous one was. Okay, now let's put all that aside. We got to get to the wish list, and this is a big one. The previous generation of Tacoma, it had a problem back here. There just was no way to package real human beings in the back of a Tacoma, even small ones. The problem persists here. Now, yeah, I'd love to ask for more wheelbase, but I don't think that's going to happen. So how about we scoop out the seats, like reshape the seats in the basic ones so we can have at least some storage for people's legs? If you could sort that out, I would greatly appreciate that. But I'm one man, and this is the point of the episode, that I turn around to you guys to opine in the comments below, or via our social media, MotoManTV all one word, MotoManTV all one word, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And with that, if you got value out of this episode, I would highly suggest you watch my interview with the chief engineer of this vehicle. No, not Mike Swears. He is now he's like the Uber boss at Toyota in the US. He kind of runs the whole show. But Sheldon, who is the chief engineer of this, had a fascinating discussion on all points, including the one you're asking, is the turbo reliable? He had some interesting bits to add to the discussion. You can see that episode here. Till I see you in the next episode, bis später. Something quick to point out, the sound of that engine, it doesn't really sound like a gas engine. It sounds almost like a diesel.